live button. Click. And we're live. It is Friday, January 14th, 2022, 5:03 p.m. We are 3 minutes late today because there are 6 of us, actually 7 if you count Luke, who will be leading off the questioning today. Scott has the monologue and he has a very important announcement to make.
But wait a second, why is it Alicia's here? Like you guys weren't joking when you said I was fired earlier.
No, we were not joking. We were, however, lying.
Okay.
So Alicia is here because she is thinking about becoming a co-host on In Lieu of Fun, because we need more international diversity here, and so we thought Southern Ontario was really the way to expand our regional diversity.
Break the Americans in, not too different, but
Exactly.
Love Canadians.
I'm a Canadian. I'm a Canadianophile. I really do love Canada and its people.
So I suggested that Alicia take a day of the week, and she wanted to try it out. So I said, come join on Friday and see if you're into it, and meet the Greek chorus. And so, we've got 5 co-hosts today, plus Luke, who will occasionally deliver himself of a primal scream. And we'll, of course, ask questions. But, Scott, you have the monologue today.
Yeah, thank you. So I wanted to announce this nano project, which is not about nanotechnology. It's just a small project, a really small project. And it's not like actually a project, but it's a... Anyway, so...
Is it a tweet, Scott? Is it just a tweet?
No. It actually was prompted. This nano project was prompted by you, Kate, because in the tip jar, which we set up for In Lieu of Fun, it was said you could only do it in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so
it was Bitcoin and Venmo. Those were like the only options.
So I was like, I teach about Bitcoin, but like abstractly. But I was like, I've actually never bought Bitcoin.
I have.
You have? Okay, but so one of the things is we put up a poll. Please vote.
Fill out the poll, truthfully, preferably.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's just a preference. So what I want to do is open a cryptocurrency account and buy Bitcoin, and then take a tweet, and then make an NFT out of it, pay with it with Bitcoin, and do it all, and just show it how it works. Just live tweet it, like how it goes, just a thread of like, this is how it works. Here you can see it's on the blockchain. Here you can see.
And when you sell the NFT, are you going to donate the proceeds of it to In Lieu of Fun?
Absolutely, that is so.
Because it's going to be really valuable, the NFT of your Bitcoin donation to.
Right. Well, but the thing is, we'll be able to track it all, not just by my telling you it, but by looking at the blockchain.
That's right. We
and
will
so
be able to see that.
Right, but like you can describe this to people, but to actually, I've never done it, and so I want to live tweet about it. But it's not that big a deal. That's why it's a nano project. Okay.
Look,
it's not that big a deal, guys. I mean, it's just a small thing, but I think it'll be fun.
We are not allowed to have fun anymore. But the result is that we take up all kinds of nano projects. Like this one, and like having Scott Anderson on the show to talk about seditious conspiracy. And so let's start with the really important question. How many Yale law grads were indicted for seditious conspiracy yesterday?
At least one. It could be more. I don't know where the other 10 guys went to law school. We'll have to look into that. Quite possible.
So, was he in your class?
He was not in my class. He was well, I think a decade ahead of me. But evidently he was a Steve Vladek's small group co-member.
Wait, when did you?
Really?
I'm sorry. When did you
Yeah.
graduate?
I was 2010, and I think he would have been. I think Steve was 2004-ish, maybe, or a year, give or two, other direction. So I'd be in that zone. He wrote like a long SAW for Owen Fist that I found on the internet about a military commission. So
Did he take your classes? Any of your classes, Scott?
Well, he only took one. One on was there an obligation to obey the law, and he wrote a really excellent paper. No, I don't. I had nothing to do with him.
What is law?
What? No. So that's a great question.
Keeping your oath.
Yeah. No, I know. Can I just say something? Like there was so many people.
Contracts.
Like contacted me about the fact as if like I was being owned by the fact that this guy went to Yale Law School where I happened to teach now. Right. Well, 1 year before I was there, but like really, it's not my fault. But there was a like in your face, you know. Did you get any shit? Did you get any?
Of course. Of course. But he's also not like the only YLS insurrectionist. We also have Josh and Ted and a good other crew. So really, it's just it's a club.
Ted isn't YLS. Isn't Ted HLS?
I thought he was a YLS guy. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
No,
we got
Ted is
Ted,
HLS.
Whatever.
No, he's HLS, yeah.
So I just want to raise the question that's on everybody's mind about this, which is if Yale taught a curriculum that involved more law, could we expect more compliance from its graduates?
Stick burn, Ben.
I will say, you know, it is a if it's in terms of the actual like legal arguments, the education going into it, Yale law, that's not really what they're focused on. So I don't think really they can claim to have contributed much in that regard, one way or the other.
Because they teach so little law, they couldn't have contributed to it one way or the other.
law and something. You don't know what the and is.
Law and insurrection. That's really where it comes law and law,
you'd have
law
to be pretty desperate
violence.
For some impact to claim that one. I'm thinking.
I think Yale should run with it. I mean, they've got two major figures now in the insurrection. It's a very small school. So, I mean, per capita contributors to the insurrection, it's wildly overperforming.
I mean, we did have up until like 2-3 years ago, or 4 years ago, maybe a Calhoun College. I mean,
Do you not remember? I think when I was there, it was the controversy over Calhoun College, and then there was also the controversy over the stained glass window. Do you remember this of the slaveholder beating the slave that was in like a cafeteria window, and there was like a black cafeteria worker that like threw something through the window one day and I think broke it and like was just like fuck this shit. And I think that anyways, there was like I think that was around the same time as the Calhoun discussion, but that might have been like a little bit more like in the weeds. If you were at Yale, you heard about it a lot, like because it was like these stained glass things are part of it. But yeah.
The Yale insurrection, I can kind of understand a bit better than the United States insurrection.
Yeah.
All right.
I think it's more from Princeton. Wasn't it the Southern University before the Civil War?
Yeah.
Oh wait, is that true?
Yeah.
So
that and of course the University of Virginia.
So Scott,
Wahoo.
Jokes aside, what is this seditious conspiracy case, and why should we care?
Well, a seditious conspiracy
I was
case
so confused.
is.
I thought you were asking that, Scott. And like, he's not
It's
going to
been
be able to
confusing.
answer that question.
No, I was directing the question
So prepared a monologue
our
and was very
guest.
excited when Ben.
to our guest, the way we normally direct questions on this show.
I know, but like you said, Scott, and I just like, sorry.
You know, sometimes I call him Admiral Scott after the discoverer of the South Pole, or the first journey to the South Pole, but nobody seems to get it. So I only do that interpersonally with Admiral Scott.
And I dressed like a sailor for like 2 weeks of staff meetings, and nobody still got it. So
yeah,
I'm gonna ruin everything right now, guys. But like he also does that with me. Ben does.
All right, Mr. Anderson, which is what everybody calls you. What gives with this indictment? How big a deal is it? And what do people need to know?
So this is the latest iteration, the latest and greatest in efforts to prosecute the Oath Keepers. It's actually not just one new indictment. It's 3 new indictments that slice and dice the pre-existing indictments of earlier Oath Keepers. Before the 12th, I think, which was Wednesday, when those new indictments were issued, a bunch of Oath Keepers, I think 17 of them, maybe up to 20 at some point, a couple of them pled out, were on charges for a more conventional criminal conspiracy. There's lots and lots of conspiracy statutes. There's 18 U.S.C. 371 for like trying to interfere with electoral count certification, among other criminal acts like disposing of records, damaging federal property, things like that. But that was just a conventional criminal conspiracy, 5-year sentence. And what didn't have a tie to a lot of these more laws, most of which date back to kind of the Reconstruction era, that more specifically focus on various types of seditious acts, meaning efforts to disrupt the ability to enforce American law and undermine American governance. So this updated indictment, which is not superseding, actually takes 9 of the defendants from that other case, peels them off, attaches them to Stewart Rhodes, YLS alumni Stewart Rhodes, as well as another defendant, and says, you 11 guys who were kind of
this is the guy who could have had a monocle, but he instead chooses to have eyeglasses and an eye patch.
Yes, it's a strange choice. I want to know if that was a thing at the time he was in small group, because that would have been very, very intimidating, I feel like, for Steve.
To know if that was the case
I'm very curious.
Sorry.
But also, where do you get a monocle these days? Because I've looked on Warby Parker and I have not seen any, but somewhere out there, if somebody points me to them,
this.
break it in half, yeah, and squint hard with one eye. But anyway, so it takes these 11 guys, charges them with seditious conspiracy, a conspiracy specifically to undermine essentially U.S. government and the enforcement of federal law, a statute that's controversial in a variety of ways, most controversially, most recently, because Jeffrey Rosen suggested it could and perhaps should be used to prosecute people who occupied courthouses and were engaged in other forms of civil disobedience during the protests of 2020. But prosecutes those 11 people for those and actually 2 related conspiracy charges, both of which relate to interfering with federal processes, the counting certification, and members of Congress trying to do their jobs. Still charges the other 7 guys left over from the other indictment, which is now on number 7 superseding indictment, with the conventional criminal conspiracy. And then one guy randomly fell out. So they have a 3rd indictment against one guy where they dropped all the conspiracy charges and are just charging him with it kind of intruding on federal policy and disrupting the procedure, presumably because my guess is because there's like no effort to tie him. There's no evidence that he was actually conspiring or coordinating with people. I think the big takeaway from this is that it's kind of notable they use this criminal provision. It's a serious one and serious charges. But the most interesting or most notable part about this is they actually built the complaint, or the indictment, I should say, around the specific coordination among these Oath Keepers leaders, specifically preparing for violence on January 6th, to the extent that they actually, again, kicked out other Oath Keepers members who are on this pre-existing indictment, are being charged under a separate, broader conspiracy, but not seditious conspiracy. It's basically making the case that seditious conspiracy, they're hinging it on this idea that these guys coordinated violent action to disrupt the government procedure. That's notable because that's not the sort of thing that President Trump or Roger Stone or a lot of these other people associated with this effort who people also want to be held accountable and have occasionally said should be charged with seditious conspiracy or a part of a seditious conspiracy, that's not the sort of things that they did. They weren't involved with that sort of very concrete logistical planning for violence on January 6th. So I think it suggests that DOJ, at least under this version of their theory of seditious conspiracy, they're not going to bring charges against those people. They're instead using it very narrowly among the people actually planning, not just participating in, planning the violence on January 6th. That said, we could well see it against the Proud Boys. We could well see it used against other people who had that sort of direct involvement. So that's my takeaway point. Me and a bunch of co-authors have a piece that went up on Lawfare maybe an hour or two ago, making that basic takeaway point.
So I was watching some clips really quickly, like on Fox News that have like been circulating, and there is apparently some member of like a person that was in all of these videos and was apparently that the right is trying to make, I forget the guy's name, but the right is trying to act like he hasn't been charged with anything. Does anyone know who I'm talking about? It's like they're basically kind of trying to, without saying it, say that basically he's an FBI informant and that he's pushing, it was a Tucker clip, and that he was put, like this one particular actor is seen in all of these videos encouraging people to move and yet has not been indicted, and the FBI is explicitly
This is the person that they're trying to claim is an FBI.
Yes. No, and the FBI
false flag
specifically
operator.
declared that he is not, and that like I'm really sorry.
Well, no,
Robert
he
F.
has
It's
specifically
Robert F.
declared.
Thank you, John Bordeaux.
The FBI does not comment on who may be an informant or not, but he has specifically said he was not under at any time. But he's not involved in this indictment. Is that right?
That's
Scott?
what I was asking.
No, I don't believe so. And it's worth noting they've had 4 people flip already and plead guilty and as part of their plea agree to cooperate with the government. Now that's very clearly like they got more information at some point in the last few months, or they've just kind of been holding it in reserve. Because the one thing that's new in this indictment is that they have conversations from a number of new Slack channels that were specifically identified as Oathkeeper leadership. As like they have like 3 or 4 of them. Some are leadership for the organization. Some are leadership specifically in relation to January 6th or events of January 6th. And so they do have new information they're bringing to bear in this indictment. I don't know if it's clear whether that's like something they just got in the last few months or whether it's something they've had for a while, but just didn't feel the need to use it and roll it out until they decided, well, we want to actually charge seditious conspiracy. So we want to up our evidence and our allegations around the mens rea of saying they have this very specific intent to disrupt this federal process using violence.
I will just say that I have now reported out whether or not Rhodes had an eye while he was in small group at Yale, and he did not.
Ooh.
Or he did. Oh, sorry, he did. He shot it out after small group at Yale, and Jed Rubenfeld was his small group leader, and he was really out there, according to someone who is in his small group. And the Obama administration pushed him over the edge. Is the anonymous reporting that I'm doing. But this is, I think that this is.
So basically, so it's like not our fault; it's Obama's fault.
Yeah.
Thanks, Obama.
Okay.
I was just wondering, like, how did it push him over the edge? Just him being there? The whole
It
administration?
was because he was black. Yeah, I think that was like, that was. I mean, really, that's enough for anybody, right? I think that was a joke, everybody.
We knew.
Good disclaimer.
I mean, just to be really simplistic, do they have the evidence? I mean, like based on what we know, like, is it going to be a really hard thing to show the mens rea that they intended to overthrow the government?
It's a hell of a signal thread they got.
It is a hell of a signal thread. It is like exceptionally clear what they're planning. And we're planning well after January 6th. I think some of the last messages that are in the indictment say on January 17th or 20th, hey, I just bought $17,000 worth of guns. I'm driving to Texas. I'll meet you there. Let's talk about next steps. So it is really quite clear in the signal thread. And what's interesting is like you really get a sense of the role each of them played. You know, there's one set of guys that's a quick response force. It's actually stationing itself in Virginia. Like an interesting part of this is actually like DC gun laws appear to have actually deterred some of these guys from bringing in their heavier guns into the city. Instead, they stationed them out in Virginia and were ready to deploy, perhaps by boat, to the Jefferson Memorial to bring the guns in the event of some sort of incident, you know? So they had this like very, very concrete sort of plan, a lot of like military logic. It reads like kind of like a weird LARP these guys are involved in, where they're calling each other commander and using lots of weird military slang in strange ways. But it's very detailed, and you get a sense of this is what they're sharing.
The lawfare people call me commander. I think it's important, you know, to.
And we only enter rooms in stacks: stack one,
That's
stack
right.
two,
Exactly.
single file, reach and entry. Exactly.
The one thing that I think's like the phrase, it wasn't there some statement that we're not getting through this without a civil war is like the very memorable phrase from this gentleman. And one of the things that I was pondering is with all the speech that tends to take on this like militaristic tone and slight, when people just say, "Oh, I was just exaggerating for effect," like I think the stack channel is like probably going to prevent them from doing that, right? Or is it just the presence of, like, how much of the actions taken that day can be really traced within the indictment? I only looked at it very briefly, so I was curious to see, like, do they give specific people that were reporting to them, or was it disenfranchised? Sorry.
It was no, I love it. All I want to do is listen to your baby, honestly.
Kept that sentence going so coherently. GDF, like I have no idea
impressive.
how you did that.
I have a 1-year-old at home, and he's like just past the like polite little moan phase, and I actually am so nostalgic for it. I'm realizing now as I listen to your baby. I was going to say it's very specific about very specific about the acts they undertook on January 6th, about the roles they're taking. You get a sense of like this whole kind of strategy and vision they build around. Now, like there are parts of that might fall apart under greater scrutiny, right? But they really built the case that like these guys set up assault teams. Like they have a stack 1, stack 2. They actually had that in prior indictments as well, but here they really flesh it out a lot more. And they describe how a stack is like a SWAT or paramilitary tactic for entering in a building. You either stack it or you wedge it, I guess. They're kind of two different approaches. I've never done it myself. And so they actually set up these guys that approach single file line to breach the Capitol. You can see videos of them kind of marching through the crowd up to the doors of the Capitol in some of the videos of the day. And this kind of built the case saying like, oh no, that wasn't an accident. That wasn't just polite single file. That was a military tactic. And that feeds into the seditious conspiracy idea and mens rea, because it is deliberately intending to deploy violence to disrupt the operation of federal law.
Ignorant foreign question here. I'm just wondering, how did they get this signal channel? Did the company hand it over in the end?
Oh, I kind of be surprised if Signal does that because it's so part of their brand. My guess is they had
I don't even think they have the capacity to do that.
I don't think they do. Yeah, you're right.
It doesn't have it. It doesn't store on their servers.
So I've been wondering this for a while. It's Signal. It's an end-to-end encrypted channel that they like. Right. So Scott, you're also kind of making the skeptical face, and I like. I'm kind of like, does this mean that basically they had the only thing that could make any sense to me on this is that they had an infiltrator in that Signal channel? No, you don't think so?
No, they have the cooperation of a couple of the defendants. It's somebody turned over their phone.
Oh,
right.
That's what I'm saying. That's like the same. We're saying the same thing. It wasn't that Signal turned over anything because they wouldn't have that information. It was that there was someone in the channel.
And no one.
I think that's right. I'm surprised. That's what I'm surprised by, is that they didn't set up to delete automatically, which I actually thought was a default setting on Signal. I think it's
but of course it doesn't matter because you can always screen cap. I mean,
right, exactly. But they'd have to have somebody trying to screen cap before that, like
when it was happening.
Clicks.
Yeah, no, I think this is somebody who, after the fact, decided to cooperate and turned over their phone, and the things were not set to. I don't think this was a real-time effort by somebody to inform on the group. I think this was they somebody did not have those default settings set appropriately, and is now cooperating, turned over his phone, and screw the others.
That's my guess. I think that's what makes the most sense.
Do you think there's a high likelihood of conviction in this, or is it like most cases kind of a crapshoot?
No, they check all the elements. They seem to have strong evidence. They've already got people playing out, admittedly to different charges, but like they have taken the seditious conspiracy statute that is controversial in part because in theory it could be used to apply to all sorts of civil disobedience and other sort of actions, and they have found these people who have committed this set of crimes that is so within the heart of that, it's almost the least controversial part of it, because they're literally, and they've got strong evidence showing they specifically intended to deploy violence to stop a legal process of the federal government. So, I think they've got as strong a case as you could ask for at this point, if all this evidence actually shows what it says in the indictment. Now, maybe, again, there are nuances and things we're lacking if we don't have the whole Slack record, but I'd be a little surprised because it does not seem like there's a lot of shades of gray about what's happening. But again, that's a choice on DOJ's part. Like, that's what I think, to me, is the part that some people might find disheartening. It means that I don't think we're going to see seditious conspiracy charges against Donald Trump, Roger Stone, or any of these people. I don't think I never really thought we were, but certainly this model of seditious conspiracy that the Garland DOJ is willing to pursue is a narrow one and a pretty high threshold. And even among, remember, there's just some of the Oath Keepers, like other Oath Keepers aren't being included in this indictment, who were there on January 6th kicking down doors, but because they weren't actively planning it, they said, nope, we're not going to make that seditious conspiracy. We're going to focus on the leaders who had the clearest signs of that intent. And that's just hard to do with a lot of the other people who are around and might have moral responsibility for what happened on January 6th, but I don't think they're going to see them get charged this way. Maybe it's different for, like, some people say some members of Congress handed over maps and were like giving directions about where to go. That's like the one group that you could see that actually fitting in here, if that's the level of operational coordination they have. But, anything short of that, I have trouble seeing fit within the scope of this conspiracy.
Do you worry that if the Republicans come back to power in 2024, that punishment for sneezing will be seditious conspiracy? That is, it's such a powerful labeling tool, and once it's used, it gets used in response, almost completely independently of the reasons why it was used.
Yeah, I think that is like channeling the concern a lot of people have over seditious conspiracy and other sedition and sedition-related crimes. Like, I don't know. I don't see like the naming element of this actually weighing in that much, and I think there's a reason DOJ like seditious conspiracy has been used a number of times in the past. Used against a bunch of Al Qaeda informants, including
recently.
Yeah, including in the last 10 years, certainly.
Well, and the Sheikh Omar Abdulrahman case. And the case of the group of people around him was a seditious conspiracy case. And I don't recall a lot of people saying, hey, if you plan to blow up the Holland Tunnel and, kill, have a reign of terror in New York, and you do it to overthrow the government and replace it with an Islamist, sort of Taliban-like autocracy, that really, there's a slippery slope there. And this is kind of the same thing. If you plan to attack the Capitol in order to prevent the peaceful transition of power violently, and by the way, you then do it, I'm just like, and you with specific intent,
and the trolley is going straight down the track.
And you went to Yale Law School.
Right.
It's
guilty.
I will say, like, the one thing to bear in mind about this is seditious conspiracy is in this like universe of other mostly like Reconstruction era criminal statutes, and a lot of them have another. It does not have an element that I think actually is more problematic that other ones do have, which is this disqualification from public office that the insurrection prohibition that is in the U.S. Code prior to seditious conspiracy does have, as do a number of other provisions, which are all using like the 14th Amendment's provision saying, hey, like if you commit basically insurrection, you can be disqualified from public office. And like I find those, because there's lots of other federal statutes that you can use to prosecute people who break into federal buildings and interrupt federal proceedings. You don't need to use seditious conspiracy, and a seditious conspiracy is just one more way to get a jail time. So there's not really a reason to use it most of the time. For part of the reason I don't think you see DOJ turning it to it often. If they want to start disqualifying people from public office, they'd have to turn those other statutes. I'd find that more worrisome because I find that to be a problematic practice and one that'd be more ripe for abuse in ways that the criminal code doesn't already facilitate. That's part of the reason why I'm also just generally not that bullish on the idea of using the 14th Amendment to disqualify people separate from criminal charges either. But I know some people are. I think that's the sort of thing that you will see people doing crazy things to former Black Lives Matter protesters and other people.
I
more dangerous.
I am all for litigating this shit on a case-by-case basis and, based on something good, round, and
based
vague,
on local norms and juries.
Like the totality of the circumstances test.
Exactly. And state legislatures could also, in theory, start doing it.
Exactly.
I'm going to tag out really quickly, but before I do, I just wanted to ask you really quickly, related to your 14th Amendment, your 14th Amendment point, the current movement against Madison Cawthorn. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but have you guys watched this? That they're basically trying to get him off the ballot for re-election in the House based on his support of the insurrectionists under the 14th Amendment. And there is I think it's a petition circulating is like the current stage of things, or like it's litigation. Is it litigation? It's more than petition.
Yeah,
okay. I thought that there was something filed in court, and I was just trying to like figure out like where. I guess you file under the 14th Amendment, but there's like, curious whether they file it in state and federal, but I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are. I haven't looked at much of it, obviously. I just was like, saw the headline and like read the clip, and yeah. But Alicia, it's so great to see you. Keep hosting with the mosting, and Scott, other Scott, this was lovely.
Yeah, so thoughts on Madison Cawthorn?
It's a really interesting case. I need to read it a little more. I haven't gotten to read the actual filing yet. What I will say is the 14th Amendment kicks open this possibility that you can start disqualifying people from public office. I looked into this. On January 6th, there was an insurrection. I should say, December 31st, my wife was due with the baby. January 6th, there was an insurrection. January 9th, we had the baby. For those 2 days, I very seriously tried to write a piece about the 14th Amendment issues and then have not had a chance to look at it again since I had that baby. So I'm doing this from memory and maybe a little fuzzy. But from the history I remember looking at is that there's actually a lot of confusion after in the Reconstruction era about how on earth you would implement the 14th Amendment bet. And they ended up actually passing a law, Congress did, assigning and making a responsibility of U.S. attorneys to proactively go and file these suits in local, state, and federal courts to disqualify federal and state and local officials who had participated in the Confederacy. And so there was this actually like very deliberate policy to go about doing this, but it was driven by the executive branch. So I strongly suspect, and I should note also state legislatures and at one point Congress, although actually for anarchists not related to the Reconstruction or Civil War, actually proactively voted to expel some of their members because they were involved in the Confederacy or involved in the anarchist movement. But absent either the federal government making that sort of step or a legislature or somebody else implementing the Fourth Amendment that way, I'm not sure like a private plaintiff could just sue over it, because it's not clear to me that it's that automatic that the courts are going to proactively say, oh yeah, we're going to interpret where the contours of the 14th Amendment are without any guidance from a policy body implementing it. That's my guess about why that has the biggest problem. But if some state legislature decides to act on it at some point, that raises a whole bucket of other questions, because there is historical precedent for that.
All right. Alicia, Scott, Shapiro, do either of you have any other questions before we go to the audience?
I have one other, and I just need to make the horrible statement to how ironic it is that a bunch of conspiracy theorists are being brought up on conspiracy charges, but that's not what I want to ask. Do you see any way to actually hold politicians who may have been instigators, if nothing else, in this accountable beyond them not getting elected again? Because I'm a little afraid, given that some of the polling on the Republican side seems to suggest that there shouldn't even be an investigation on January 6th, that might not work out. Are there other things that could be done?
It depends on like the role and involvement. If it is a degree of coordination or involvement, I think might be legal remedies at various points. I suspect there may be more civil than criminal. But like, look, the remedy that was intended for all this is impeachment, because there was kind of assumption that like these sorts of things would be vile enough to encourage people to impeach people for doing it. And that really was the main accountability mechanism for the presidency in a lot of regards, or at least through in the views of a lot of people throughout American history. So I'm not sure there is any more concrete method for legal accountability. Kind of a bummer, but that's my guess. That's my gut instinct. Until proven otherwise, I'm assuming there's not.
Scott, you got anything else?
Just to agree and just to say that, like, if you can't pull off something politically, you shouldn't try to do it legally. Because get into problems. But over to you.
Richard Wattenbarger, the floor is yours. I can't unmute you, though. Can you unmute yourself? I'm going to let Jared ask Jared's question while we figure out your mute situation. Jared, the floor is yours.
Hi, I have a question. You kind of touched on a piece of it already, which is the encrypted thing, which is that they quoted extensively from Signal in the indictment. So I'm curious if this indicates that end-to-end encryption is less of a problem in practice than the government has argued in the past.
Yeah, so Scott, do you have thoughts on this? Either Scott? I definitely do.
I don't think this speaks much to that, just because it looks like I'm assuming there was an informant. If there wasn't, I mean, the going black problem has always been when you don't have an informant or somebody with access to these sorts of systems. So I don't think it's really bears on that. Now, if it comes out that in fact they don't have an informant, they got around this, hiring some private firm to hack into Signal somehow, which I don't think is the case or technically feasible by my understanding of the technology, then that's a different story. But otherwise, as is, it's always been true, like no matter how secure your codes are, your systems or your communications, like if you got a man on the inside, you can get into it. That's not going to change. So I don't think it actually bears on that debate too much.
I would just say that I think it does, because the people who have the privacy side of in the going dark debate, who say that there needs to be end-to-end encryption without any backdoors and stuff, what they say is that, like, it's true that now with easy to use encryption, encrypted communications are a problem. But it's also true that there have been so many other type of ways of investigating crimes which show that state power is actually growing rather than receding because of encryption. So the fact that even when you use an end-to-end encrypted device, they can still build a seditious conspiracy case, I think it kind of goes to like the sense of how urgent this is. Anyway, but I reasonably can differ here.
Yeah, so
I agree. I agree with that. I think that makes sense.
I sort of disagree with that. I think the problem in end-to-end has never been with large numbers. If you have 10 people on a thread and the government has case against 3 of them, one of them's going to crack and they're going to turn over their phone. That has never been the issue. The issue is the following. Alicia and I communicate only by Signal for reasons having nothing to do with anything except that's the app we use. If we were conspiring to do something horribly illegal and vile, that would be very, very hard to access. And without one of our cooperation, it's probably beyond the capacity of, there's a lot of math that says you can't do it. And so in the situation in which the circle of communication is large, this is a surmountable problem, and this is an example of it. In the context of small group communication, particularly tight network communication, it's a very, very hard problem, and this doesn't address it one way or the other.
I will say though, but I think it talks about scale of the problem, because a small conspiracy of 2 people just can't accomplish as much as a conspiracy of 10 to 20 to 30 people. But right? I take your point. Yeah.
I don't know. I could get pretty bored.
I mean, I just want to say, if to the FBI or the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we want to be ecumenical in our law enforcement thing here. But if you guys want to come after Alicia and my communication, you're going to get a lot of questions about dog shirts and
we're already accused of conspiracies so often. I mean, why not?
Right.
I would say that this is partly a joke, but it's that here it's unlikely just to be you and your co-conspirator. I mean, you appear on a show every day. And I don't mean you particularly appear on a show. We're all broadcasting and sharing stuff, or our friends are broadcasting, sharing stuff about us.
That's exactly right.
Right, and so there's a way in which it seems as if, from other perspectives, the ability of the state to gather information has grown quite substantially, and so it's not clear to me that that things are receding away from the government. It's just that its progress is being slowed somewhat.
Richard Wattenbarger. This time the floor is really yours, and you're unmuted.
Can you hear me? You can hear me.
Oh, yes.
Hello, everybody.
Don't abuse
Alicia, welcome. So my question, getting back to this issue of legislators who might be involved, and besides the need to gather sufficient evidence, what kind of considerations will the Justice Department take into account in the cases of any legislators that might have been involved with the supporting the insurrectionists? And do we have much publicly available information to suggest that some of them have actually done things that demand indictments?
Great question. Scott?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a Rolling Stone article maybe a month or 2 ago. I can't remember exactly when I feel like what kicked off this whole conversation about members of Congress direct involvement, because I had a bunch of reporting, although it was not publicly sourced, and I think there's no reason I did not believe it any more than the other media reporting, but you would want to dig deeper if you were building a case. But basically saying, look, a bunch of these members of Congress and their chiefs of staff and senior staff people were in touch with people coordinating the January 6th rally. And again, I think that's where this allegation that some people handed over maps may have come in, things like that. Again, all of this sort of activity is not necessarily adjacent to the seditious conspiracy conduct, which again is very specifically coordinating for violence, guns, quick response forces, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think it necessarily gets there. Could you get to some broader conspiracy under, a general criminal conspiracy to interfere with the electoral count, or there are separate ones about interfering with members of Congress trying to do their jobs or with other federal proceedings? Maybe, but it would really, you'd have to build a pretty strong case of intent, and that they knew what they were doing and knew what they were intending to do. And with, I think members of Congress, there are variety for political reasons. The DOJ is going to be a lot more sensitive around it and tread really lightly unless there's pretty damning smoking gun. I try to think other than speech and debate, I don't think there's any necessarily constitutional barrier, but speech and debate / things that get into separation of powers disputes, I don't think would really be implicated here, but maybe there'd be some observation. But I think it's much more about the optics of political nexus that they might be hesitant a little bit. and perhaps most importantly, like you have the January 6th committee beginning to do some of this work themselves. So DOJ, I suspect, will kind of follow in the wake of that. You can scoop up whatever information they come out. There's this question about the extent to which they're going to be able to get information out of Kevin McCarthy and others and subpoena them for the information. I know there's legal debate around that. Mike Stern, like a pretty well-regarded former congressional lawyer, I think was quoted in the Wall Street Journal today, somewhere else today, that got passed around the lawfare Slack, saying basically, he's like, oh yeah, I think the committee can totally get information out of its members. There's no legal reason it can't. It just might be a heavy lift in the limited time frame that the January 6th committee has left. So, but that committee is better positioned to at least have these fights than DOJ is going to want to because of the political valence. So, long story short, I don't think there's necessarily big legal barriers as political barriers, but I still don't think DOJ is going to stick their necks into it unnecessarily.
Do you think that the January 6th committee or commission will have enough time to dig into the social media aspect of this that was announced yesterday, the subpoenas that were sent out? How long will it exist?
That's a good question. It all hinges on the election, right? Like, I think we know it will exist through January 2nd is the default date, although Congress can change it about when the next Congress will get sworn in after the next election. So it exists that far. They've said they want to wrap up their duties and wrap up their main thrust of their investigation in the fall to give some time before the election. Although that seems like very optimistic. I really have always thought of the January 2nd date as the real drop dead date. Now look, Democrats keep the House, then they can keep going. But if they don't, they'll probably shut down at that point. Does that leave them enough time? It depends on what they're trying to do with it. To get a complete picture, no. Maybe to get, if there's very specific information in the universe, what they're asking for, and particularly if they can get the companies to prioritize it, maybe there's more there. They may just want to get the request rolling in hopes that it, generates the data. Even if somebody else can do something with it, they can get it back by January 2nd. They can release it or put it somewhere else where it will be accessible to others. I'm not sure exactly.
So we have two conceptually related questions, one from Larky and one from Matteo. I'm just going to group them together. Gentlemen, the floor is yours in alphabetical order of first name.
LM.
Well, you'll know you're not talking about my first name. That's the problem.
It's the only name I got for you, dude.
It's true. It's true. I was doing the math in my head for some reason. So the question I asked is, does the fact that I went to a less prestigious law school mean it'll be harder for me to have a leadership position in a murderous insurrection, which is sort of a joke question, which leads to
but it is going to hurt you. I'm just saying.
Which is.
I think most violent insurrection groups it's really kind of like a small Ivy, like it's a Cornell crowd, and that's really what we're talking about. So that's really the sweet spot of where it is, because because Ithaca does terrible things to people. So I think that's really the heart of it. So don't worry about it too much.
So is there anything? So
hold the serious question for a minute. We got to get Matteo in here on the conceptually related
I'm very
question.
sorry.
My question is deadly serious. I think I've blown the lid off of this thing. I've been thinking about it, and it occurs to me that perhaps January 6th was a false flag operation, whereby the law school administration plucked Rhodes from obscurity and orchestrated this whole thing just to distract from some recent public relations issues that they've had.
What do you think, Scott Shapiro? Is that should we be looking at Heather Gerken here?
I actually don't know what stories you're referring to. I know that there's been a lot of discussion about us keeping torts in the first semester.
Oh, and Guido Calabresi's retirement, stuff like that.
Well, I mean, and that's really been a hot button issue for us. But I don't think that, although that would be a good idea to get it away from the people who want to replace it with regulation or something. That would have been like a very clever thing for Dean Gerken to do. But other than that, I really don't know any other stories.
All right, Mr. Larky, you have an actual question?
Well, the sort of non-joke version is besides basically it being funny, is there any reason to talk about the fact that all these very intelligent, highly credentialed, highly educated people are involved, or is it just, very motivated people will be successful no matter what they do, including, leading murderous insurrections?
That's a good question. What do you think, Scott? Is there any actual substance to the to the Yale Law School angle of this, or is it just Schadenfreude?
It's a good question in a way. Like, what I will say is this: I think the 2000s era was a period where, if you were already inclined to be hostile towards the executive branch and federal government, like a lot of what was happening in the post 9/11 era was very scary. And this is something that we know Mr. Rhodes was very interested in. Again, he wrote this prize-winning SAW topic on this. That was not bad. I skimmed it. I need to read it in more detail. At that time, he was a student and was involved in kind of studying this stuff. I think he was a veteran. He was a veteran at the time. And so you can see, and particularly, YLS, I do think certainly when I was there, I'm sure it wasn't that different 10 years earlier. I'm sure it's not that different now, embraced very consciously and in a way that I appreciated at the time and I continue to appreciate, even if I don't always fully agree with it, its position as a critical institution, challenging structures of authority and trying to undermine them and act as a hub of resistance. And so I don't think I think there actually might be a little bit of a nexus there as a legitimating framework and kind of putting Mr. Rhodes in the mindset of saying, man, what the executive branch is doing is a real problem and needs to be opposed. It just seems to have gone in a very, very different direction than I think most alumni go. I don't think Wiles bears responsibility for that. But, there are a lot of things he was concerned about. Lots of people were concerned about at the time. And, maybe it started around a trajectory of went from healthy skepticism to unhealthy skepticism of government.
Alicia, is there a Canadian obsession with making fun of YLS, or is there some institution in Canada, like the University of Toronto Law School, that people take as much pleasure in when UT people become insurrectionists as I do when Yale Law School people do?
See, when you said institution, it took away my answer, because really for us, it's Americans.
I will say a quarter of my law school small group was Canadian, something like that. So I don't know what they're cooking up, but Nadia and Rory, if you're out there, we're keeping our eyes on you.
You'd take Gavin McInnes, co-founder of Proud Boys. Just take him and Justin Bieber. No connection. Just take them both.
No, right, that's right. So you have some complicity in this too, right? Because McInnes is Canadian.
Well, yes, but I was going to ask this earlier.
I'm asking, Alicia, I'm asking the questions. Okay.
I'm not the guest.
We all have plenary authority to just no. I just say I was doing this to show how unjust and unfair it is to use guilt by association. Yeah, so right. This was a teachable moment, right?
I wanted to help you early on in the show, and then I thought better of it because I figured you would try to blame Canada for Proud Boys and everything else.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good to keep your powder dry. Yeah.
Well, I am trying to bring in Zunyi for the last question. We'll see if the tech is working for some reason. Oh, there she is. Hello, it's been a long time.
Yes, it has. Happy New Year, everyone.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
You get the last question commenty thing today.
Well, I just wanted to kind of set the stage for people that don't remember that the government is quite familiar with Stuart Rhodes and the Oath Keepers. And we have the Bundy standoff during the administration. He was right there. The Malheur occupation in Oregon, which is a huge case that did have conspiracy charge, not seditious conspiracy. but it was the Oath Keepers that did the occupation for 40 days. And he's recently been out in Portland during all the chaos that was going on in Portland protests. And the thing that I have concerns about is that in the DOJ case, the conspiracy charges, the leadership was acquitted. This is obviously the totally different cases and things like that, but that was the real big charge, and they were acquitted. So it makes me concerned. And then the other part of it is that given the Oath Keepers and Stuart Rhodes' behavior, I mean, we don't want to live in a monitoring state or anything like that, but how is it possible that the government wasn't doing knock and talks with him before January 6th? I mean, I'm just still shocked that we haven't heard enough from the FBI about what they were doing prior to this. I don't know how Ray keeps his position. Apologies for Ray fans. I'm not anti-Ray. It's just really concerned about the FBI. And so I'm just wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so let's reserve the question of FBI failure, because we actually are maybe doing a show on that next week, and I want to. Both Quinta Jurecic and Pete Strzok have been thinking a lot about this, as have I, and so I actually want to do a show specifically about this. But yeah, so Scott, what do we know about monitoring specifically of Stuart Rhodes and Oath Keepers after the Bundy occupation up through January 6th?
It's a good question. I don't know. The one thing I will say is I strongly suspect the FBI has been monitoring them and was monitoring them. There is this question about Trump administration policies, how they focused and thought about domestic violence. But, we know that the FBI was actively involved in monitoring the people who were involved in Governor Whitmer's attempted abduction. Because there have been a number of FBI witnesses that have caused a lot of problems for the prosecution, including some who were allegedly double agents, triple agents. I don't know what number agents they are at that point. Others that have kind of produced kind of flawed evidence, but they had a number of informants in that group, which was a far lower profile than the Oath Keepers. What I would say is that if you've got those people, there's no reason to trot them out if you don't need them to build your case. And if they got the signal evidence and they can, get that signal evidence into court, establish the chain of connection, they don't need to talk about it. And why would they? It's just going to hurt their case and complicate things and blow somebody who might still be gathering information on a group that's still active and still out there. So I strongly suspect their FBI is doing more than we are aware of. Maybe not enough, but more than we're getting just from this trial, and is continuing to do so. I will also say there is an amazing podcast everyone should listen to called Bundyville, podcast, a series of essays by Lieu, who's an independent journalist associated with NPR and Long Reads. That has 2 seasons that talks all about the origins of a lot of the right-wing patriot movement and related movements, including that bleeds into the Oath Keepers, and frankly, of which the Oath Keepers is on the more sane side of the spectrum in a lot of regards. It is a phenomenal listen/read. Everybody check it out. I interviewed her for the Lawfare podcast last year too.
And
so definitely check that out.
And there is a gentleman, I'll just call him Casey for now, who is a longtime Lawfare reader and engager, who is an elected official out in that area, and we should have him on to talk about the interaction between those groups and his community. It's a pretty interesting story.
You should have Leah Satilli, the host, on too. She's awesome. I'm sure she'd be down to do it.
When you said that the Proud Boys were the more rational of the extremists, I thought of saying, well, the head did go to Yale.
They did go to Yale Law School. Well, we are going to leave it there on that positive note for YLS. Scott Anderson, you're a great American. It's great to see you. You still have stuff to aspire to as a Yale Law School grad. There's, you can't now be the first Yale Law School grad indicted for seditious conspiracy, but there are charges.
But God damn it, I can still be the second.
You can be the second. And there are charges that have never been leveled against a Yale Law School student. violation of the intellectual property of the Smokey the Bear logo, for example. Like, there's stuff to work on here. Alicia Wanless, you're a lousy American, but you're a great Canadian. And we hope you will come back as a co-host in the future.
Absolutely.
We're going to be back a bunch of hours and 58 minutes from now. We're going to be with Preet Bharara on Monday. Preet is coming back to the show to, to talk about what's on Preet's mind and that sort of shit. And until then, Scott?
We can't have fun anymore, but we can have elite institutions train the next generation of insurrectionists.
Yeah.